Let's talk about web services. All right, so towards the end of the last century, there was a lot of excitement about engineers trying to integrate all sorts of disparate systems. Right, it had become that over many years, people were using lots of different types of infrastructure, different types of databases, different types of programming languages, different operating systems, and uh, and there was a lot of promise in the idea that we could perhaps integrate all these systems, right? If we could all only find a way that we could encapsulate each one of these infrastructures in a known API, that well-defined API, perhaps based on some international standard, we could integrate them seamlessly, right? The idea was that perhaps we could have a company, Ford Motor Company, be able to integrate with its suppliers, right? And so that whenever it was low on tires, it could automatically order more tires from its vendors, or windshields, or whatever it needed, right? Instrumentations and whatnot. And that if it needed to needed a loan, for to be able to pay for this, it could automatically interact with the financial institution, and automate that part as well, right? And if and the dealerships could order their from new cars, from the new batch, automatically, right? And all this would happen automatically, right? But obviously, it was very, very hard. The suppliers had different databases. The dealership had different databases. The financial institution had different databases, and so we were looking for ways that we could encapsulate them, and so that you could still be Oracle, and you could still be MySQL, and you could still be, doesn't matter, right? And it doesn't matter that you're using Java here and using C# over there, and whatever else over there, as long as we could wrap you inside of what eventually became a service. As long as you had some integration points, and as long as we spoke the same language, right, meta language, we can all talk to one another, right? There was a lot of promise. There was a lot of competing vendors competed towards this idea, and each one was promoting how easy it was to press a button and it would create a web service for you, and you were done, right? IBM was heavily into this, Sun Microsystems, Oracle. Everybody was competing in this space. Um, and eventually, it just failed miserably. Integrating systems turned out to be much, much harder than we possibly expected. Nevertheless, the idea stuck, of being able to expose some service, some usable behavior through some well known API. So that lived on. So that idea is still with us, but the grandeur of using it for integrating huge disparate system, that's still a panacea. That's still that promise is still not fulfilled. So we're going to be looking at the technology or the technique that is used for exposing data models, right? Relational data models through services, right? And in particular, we're going to be looking at RESTful services, right? We have already looked at some examples where we have been able to, navigate to a URL and see some data that was retrieved from some database. Right? We've done that. So that's just a service. We've been using a web browser to access it. That's why perhaps we refer to as web services, but not necessarily. It could definitely certainly could be from any desktop application or from any mobile application. It doesn't need to be from a browser at all. So it doesn't need to be web. Um, Now, originally, the language, the lingua franca that we were that became very, very popular at the end of the 90s, at the beginning of the new century, was XML. XML was by default the most widely used language that was used to transfer data across networks. Okay, and there was a lot of back and forth on different types of web services. Um, uh, uh, One of the types of web services was that were more action based, where you would invoke some action and have that action create some transaction inside of the database, right, and then retrieve some response. So that became a huge type of service, right? Where you would expose multiple action or verbs that could be accessed from the outside. On the other side, there was another big umbrella of type of services were the document services, where you would instead of having actions, you would post entire documents, XML documents, that would then be processed by some service and would be either stored in the database or retrieved, or some transformation would happen along the way. And there was a big battle between the IBMs and the Microsofts of the world on which way this would go, right? And each one pulled their own way. Eventually, it was kind of like a mixture of both, right? A mixture of both turned out to be the best practice, and that's where we're going to be at, right? Now, because of the dot-com happened and everything went to hell, what survived became the new web services of today. XML had kind of fallen out of favor because of everybody was moving all their applications from desktop, converting them into some web version of their application. Instead of XML, JavaScript became and JSON became the de facto standard of transferring data across networks. So JSON today is the preferred mechanism of transferring data between web services and clients. That's unfortunate, since XML is so much a richer language that can allows you to not only be hierarchical structures, very complex hierarchical structures, but you have many much richer data types that you can configure, that you can describe your data types and your the structure of your data. Also, it has a full support for validation and checking the schema of your documents and verification before it goes out and inserts into the database, right? Also, full support for being able to transform documents from one representation into another representation. Full support for that. JSON is catching up. There are standards today that more or less allows you to do similar things in JSON, but it never became as widely an industry standard as XML. Right? It'll eventually be there. We haven't gotten to that yet.